Hello, and welcome to another episode of David's Divergent Discussions. I'm your host, David Gray Hammond, and tonight I am joined by Fergus Murray, and interestingly, also surprisingly joined by Tanya Adkin, who's been hiding from us for a while. But Tanya is here.
Only.
It's nice because usually when this happens, it's me unexpectedly saying someone couldn't make it. This time it's an unexpected addition, so I'm quite pleased with that. Um, I think we've got a good episode in store. We're going to talk about education, well-being, and monotropism, but we're going to start with talking about. We're going to start with audio descriptions. So I'm David Gray Hammond, a mid-30s white Mediterranean male. I'm wearing sunglasses. I have a shaved head. I've got a lip piercing, a beard, and an ear tunnel that doesn't fit at the moment. There's a whole story behind that. I'm sat in a very blue room wearing a grey t-shirt. Fergus, would you like to do an audio description?
Sure. So I'm a 45-year-old white person with long light brown hair and glasses. I'm in a somewhat cluttered room in front of a bookcase, very large physalis plants, and an electric keyboard.
Very good. To be fair, are we even neurodivergent if we're not sat in a cluttered room?
Well, every now and then, David, you do meet absolutely no clutter neurodivergent.
I am one of those.
There you go.
Tanya, would you like to do an audio?
Yeah, I think I create so much clutter that I have to live in a clutter-free environment, otherwise I wouldn't be able to move. But yeah, okay, so my name is Tanya Adkin. I am a white female-presenting person with shoulder-length brown hair with blonde streaks in it. I've got some big brown glasses on and I'm wearing a white t-shirt and I'm sat in my dining room and you can see a table and chairs and a printer behind me, of all things.
Fantastic. And obviously the rickety bookcase isn't going to fall on me anymore, but just so people are warned, some books did fall off of it during the intro video. So if there's a loud crash, I'm fine, but I can no longer leave the room. So
I feel like that bookcase has been holding on for a good year now, David.
It's only a year old.
Because me and Katie, it really does nothing for our anxiety. Have you seen the rickety bookcase, Fergus?
Yeah, I don't know if I can show it because of my lighting, but there's a bookcase just there.
And it's
okay.
It used to be right next to David, and every time David moved in his chair, because that's how they stim, he used to nudge it and it'd wobble. So yeah, I think we've been asking you to move that bookcase for the best part of a year, but yeah. Anyway,
and
tangent.
People in the comments are excited to see us all. So hello, we are here, all of us. So yeah, we're going to talk about education, monotropism, and well-being, not necessarily in that order, or maybe all mixed together, probably all mixed together. So yeah, Fergus, do you want to, talk a bit about your experiences with education?
Sure. It's a very big question. I've had many different sorts of experience with education over the years. So I'm currently a science teacher. Or officially, I'm a STEM guide. So I started working at a Montessori school in the teen section. So most Montessori schools are just primary schools, right? Or even just early years. But this one has expanded into teen years in the last few years. So I'm working with kids between the age of about 11 and 17-ish. And being in the Montessori system, I'm a guide, not a teacher. Which is an interesting distinction and one that I quite appreciate. And I'm a STEM guide, so I am actually teaching some maths, and I probably will teach some technology somewhere down the line. But at the moment, it's mostly science and maths. So that's been really interesting. I'm relatively new to that system. I might talk a bit more about it later. Before that, I was working at a couple of different schools, also in Edinburgh, working with fairly small classes. I did teacher training 10-ish years ago at Goldsmiths College, University of London. And it didn't quite kill me, but it did definitely convince me that I was never going to thrive teaching mainstream classes of 30-odd kids who didn't want to be there. So I largely enjoy being a teacher. I wish that it was easier to be an autistic teacher. I know quite a lot of autistic former teachers. To be fair, I know quite a lot of former teachers of various sorts, because the entire teaching profession in the UK has been thoroughly goved. It's amazing. You know, the man wasn't even education secretary for all that long, but the legacy that he left is just incredibly doleful. Even in Scotland, you know, maybe that's unfair to be. Yeah, I haven't been a mainstream teacher in Scotland. We do have a separate system. In many ways, I think it's probably better, but I haven't witnessed it firsthand. Yeah, that feels like a lot of detail, but there's so much more that I could say. But maybe it's better if you ask me specific questions down the line.
Okay. And Tanya, I think you've had some run-ins with the education system as well, haven't you?
Again, that's a very broad question. Do we mean personally or? Yeah. So yeah, just from a personal perspective, me and the education system never worked out. I think I went to 7 different schools. And then finally caved it in when it tried to kill me about age 14, which I think is probably similar to a lot of our experiences. You know, so it didn't work for me. So I left school with no qualifications, thinking that was broken. But thankfully found that I was really good at working in a problem solving way. So I went straight into work and thrived a little bit more. So I was late identified, but even with my own children, yeah. I did what any unidentified autistic person would do and learned the Children and Families Act back to front when my child started struggling at school. And then when I started reading about autistic experience, I was like, hang on a minute, this sounds familiar. And the rest is history, like years and years later. And now I work as a social work assistant with a wonderful child protection social worker, independent social worker called Mary Cartledge. So we are a lot within the education system, EHCPs. I spent a good 6 years working in EHCP advocacy as well. So yeah, I'm pretty well versed on the education system, or the problems with the education system at the minute, should we say.
Yeah, and I know from my own perspective, I know we cross paths quite a lot, and sort of professionally, you know, I had the similar experience of school to you. But I ultimately have ended up doing a lot of mentoring work with kids who have been traumatized by the mainstream school system. So this is probably going to be a pretty interesting episode between the 3 of us.
So, for what it's worth, I was one of the unidentified autistic kids who made it through the education system. But that's not to say that I wasn't traumatized.
Yeah.
And as it went on, I sort of did worse and worse. So I did pretty well in my GCSEs. Okay, but disappointing in my A-levels, and I made it through my undergrad degree in physics and philosophy.
See, I did abysmally with my GCSEs and A-levels, but then I went on and got a bachelor's degree, and I did all right in that. I got 2nd-class honours, so can't really.
Do you know, it was the opposite for me. So the learning element was never an issue for me. I found it very easy without, you know, because it's not easy for everybody. But I found that element really easy. It was the other stuff. I think for me, it was the social pressures going up and the impulse control that I had and the sense of justice. And, you know, anybody that knows me personally and knows my family, and they know that like my presentation is very in line with PDA. So I couldn't do the hierarchy. I didn't understand it. So that was my problem. So I ended up leaving with no GCSEs and nothing, but I'm just about to finish a master's degree. So, you know, and that's probably because I'm monotropic, but there we go.
So yeah, one of the things, and I mentioned I was going to bring this up before we went live, which by the way, we did almost forget to go live. I feel like we should just be honest about that. We were so busy talking to each other that we did not realize it was past. But before we went live, I was saying, you know, and I think this is probably quite pertinent to you, Fergus, you know, we talk a lot about making education accessible and sustainable for students, but there's also the matter of the teachers within the system who are themselves, there's going to be a number of them who are autistic and or neurodivergent in some other way. And I know you said you know a lot of autistic former teachers, and I just wonder, what do you think it is about the education system that perhaps is a barrier to access for those working within that system?
There are a lot of things. A lot of it just really comes down to the fact that we are asking too much of our teachers across the board. So teacher training, it's just accepted that you have 1 year of teacher training, and most of the actual training is crammed into the first couple of months of that. And then they throw you in a classroom while you're still writing essays and attending classes. And so you're working, 70-hour weeks to just about stay afloat, was my experience. So a heck of a lot of people just don't make it through teacher training because we have this unacceptable system from my point of view, where we only have a year to do the training. So obviously there's tons of stuff that you're just not going to learn. Being an autistic advocate, activist, educator, who's also, queer and non-binary, I'm extremely conscious of how much teachers just don't know. And it's not their fault. It's not teachers' fault that we don't have time to learn this stuff. It's set up in such a way that you go from this totally bananas workload for the teacher training year to like a not really much better NQT and newly qualified teacher year, or probationary year in Scotland. And then you're just expected to permanently work like, I don't know, 50-odd hour weeks. Like, there are going to be people out there who hear that and they're like, 50 hours isn't that much, but it is. It actually is. And like, it is for everybody. But if you're disabled, if you're inherently finding school a strain because of the way that classrooms work and, the school environment and all of it, or if you need flexibility for other reasons, a lot of people with young families have to drop out of the teaching profession, for example, or caring responsibilities. There's all sorts of reasons why the hours that we expect of teachers just makes it a deeply hostile profession in many ways. And a series of governments have tried to compensate for the constant attrition rates of teachers, where people are just always leaving the profession, by trying to recruit more people, right? And like raising the salaries of teachers, which I'm not opposed to teachers getting good salaries, but that's not really the main issue with people leaving the profession. Certainly, autistic people I know who have stopped being teachers, like if their salaries have been any part of the mix, they've been pretty far down the list, under like just chronic under-resourcing and expecting too much of teachers. Of course, this also feeds back into the fact that teachers don't have time to learn about things like neurodivergence, which come up all the time in teaching. Every class has neurodivergent kids, basically. In Scotland, we're at a level where I think it's about 30% of school children have identified so-called additional needs. And like when you hit the point where it's a third of the population, it's not really additional, right? It's just needs. Everyone has needs. This 30% identifiably are not having their needs met by default. And that's largely neurodivergence. It's probably mostly neurodivergence, but that does also include disability. And I think in Scotland, a bit weirdly, I think it includes English as a foreign language. Yeah. So
it's not just teaching, is it?
It's not just
teaching. And if I just think, And I think it's pretty much the same if you're kind of working in any profession that's government. I know that social work is exactly the same. There is just, and I always find this really bizarre, because if you're a lawyer or a doctor, you will specialise in an area of practice. And I suppose you do very much so in secondary teaching, but in early years teaching, you have to know it all. But you're also safeguarding, there are so many different areas of like disability to understand. And Senkos, they're not really Senkos. The Senko qualification, especially in England, I don't know about in Scotland, you might be able to shed some light, but it isn't really about special educational needs and disabilities, which it should be. It's more about managing budgets.
I feel like I should highlight here, Bobby's commented to say that teachers get about half a day, if that, in SEND training.
So that's all the special educational needs and disabilities.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
And it's not that they don't want it. It's not that they don't want it. They just physically do not have the time. Even when offered free training, because I do an awful lot of training for all the schools that I can up here, whenever I can, it's getting the time and the staff resources to be able to spare the staff members to actually do the training and then filter it down. They just don't have the hours.
Yeah, credit where it's due. I definitely got a bit more than that at Goldsmiths, and I had a couple of really good lecturers there, but still, it was nowhere near adequate. And it's just hard to imagine how it could possibly be adequate in the context of trying to squeeze that much into such a short time. And of course, it's not just about the workload. There's so much about the school environment that is hostile in most schools. The sensory environment, most schools aren't designed with sensory needs in mind. You have these echoey spaces with flickery, super bright fluorescent lights. As a teacher, you're talking about specializing, right? And yeah, autistic people tend to be specialists to varying degrees because we are generally monotropic. So we have things that we're very good at and things that we're not very good at. And increasingly, teachers are expected to be competent at all sorts of different things, notably admin and like office politics. You can't really get away from it. You've got to be able to get on with your colleagues. I've worked at schools where many of the teachers are weirdos who have been cast out from the wider education system or have been drawn to weird schools, frankly, which is great. But even there, me not really wanting to be around people in my breaks has sometimes been an issue.
Yeah. It's bizarre, isn't it, that we know that one size fits all approach to like children and learning does not work. Like we know that's fact. But we still peddle the same thing, but we're doing the same thing really with the workforce as well. We're expected to cover everything instead of specializing, and then, but not just that, but even like the legal kind of ramifications in terms of like safeguarding and equality acts and what you have to provide legally. I'm pretty sure if teachers really thought about what they were responsible for in their classrooms, they probably choose not to do it, because it's got to be almost impossible to uphold that level of like law and entitlement when you're so under-resourced and don't have that level of kind of knowledge that you need, really.
And something I would like to address, because ADHD Wise UK just said, oh my God, yes, and defending young people's rights, that got me into so many difficult spots. Like, I am a qualified independent advocate, and that is its own specialism in its own right. But when you're a teacher, you are having to do advocacy stuff alongside that, because you have to advocate for individual children if you're doing things right. You are saying this child needs this child has a right to this, they need it, we need to make sure they get it. And it blows my mind, actually, that, imagine doing an advocacy role on top of another role, which is already on top of like 3 or 4 other roles. And you're like, how is this sustainable in any way, shape or form?
Yeah. And especially for autistic teachers, where like our intolerance of wrongness makes it really difficult to ignore things which most teachers probably would just let slide at school. Which of course gets us into trouble as kids at school as well.
Yeah, wow. Anyway.
Well, I think we've set the scene here. You know, there's a lot of things that need to change in the education system, but we did say we were going to bring some monotropism into it. So I guess the place to start, and I'm more asking this for conversational purposes rather than because I don't know the answer, is
how can you not know the answer, David?
Would you say that educational environments are generally well designed for monotropic people?
As a general rule, yeah, no. In a number of ways. So shall we talk about how they're not? So I talked a little bit about the sensory environment, and a lot of the reason why schools are sensory hell a lot of the time for autistic kids and to some extent ADHD kids is the busyness of the sensory environment, right? It's the noises, it's the just stuff, the teachers who feel like all of their walls should have displays all over at all times, and teachers expecting kids to pay attention constantly. I don't know why anyone would expect that. It's obviously totally unrealistic. But like teachers giving a set of instructions and not writing them down and then getting angry at kids for not doing what they were told to do while they were paying attention to something else. So the whole thing of like not making sure that everything is written down, basically, or you know, if it's not written down, expressed slowly and clearly enough that you can check that everyone has really understood it, which I think is kind of realistic with very small classes and not really with classes of 15 plus kids, because they're just not going to say if they don't get it.
It's anti-flow, isn't it, really, if you think about it? That's probably the best way that I can think of describing the school environment. It's kind of anti-monotropic,
yeah,
in a way. I mean, it's great. For me, just purely from my perspective, it like, and the thing, if I'm into something, if I'm getting into a flow state and I'm really enjoying something and I'm excelling at it, and, you know, I mean, think about it. Some schools are covering like 5 subjects in a day, and then you've got breaks in between. We can't get into things, and then it's all change. We're just forced continuously to kind of split attention, and I think a lot of monotropic are very, very kind of autodidactic as well. I think we survive. Monotropic people, in my experience, and I'm very aware that, you know, when monotropic people tend to get to me, things have gone horribly wrong somewhere. So this might not be the case for everybody, but it's kind of designed to be almost toxic to a monotropic person. Like, you've got to sit with 30 people in a class, and it's hierarchical. You know, you're encouraged. Well, you're not necessarily directly encouraged. You know, you're expected to contribute to the classroom, but only like that. Don't challenge. You know, it's the social rules you've got to understand. And then if you have different teachers, every single teacher has got slightly different social expectations, or you can speak to in a different tone, or there's some things you would discuss with that one but not with that one, or you're allowed to drop the odd swear word with this one but not with that, you know, and it's all this. And then when you get to like GCSE level, not only are you doing all these different subjects, but the pressure is then piled on, and you're told that you're going to kind of ruin your life if you don't kind of do well at school, and pressure is kryptonite to a monotropic person. That's the last thing that we need. That makes us go the opposite way. So it's kind of designed to induce some kind of burnout in a way. And it's really sad as well, because, you know, one thing that in my experience that autistic or monotropic or otherwise neurodivergent people tend to do is we learn. Children learn. Like, we are designed to learn. We're never. So if we're not learning, it's because we can't. I think was it Ross Greene who said that kind of children do well if they but then here we are, and it feels almost like it feels like the schooling system, in a way, is designed to be a little bit like a gauntlet for capitalism. If you get out alive, are you going to create us any money? Are you going to produce us something, you know? Because this is what we value. We value people being able to split their attention and deal with pressure and deal with all these things to contribute. But yeah, anyway, I'm completely on a little rant. But yeah, I would say that the schooling system is, if you were going to design something that is anti-monotropic or anti-flow, it would probably come pretty close to it.
Yeah, so let's talk about flow and what you need for flow states, right? So I'm assuming that most of the people listening to this will have some concepts of flow. You know, it's like being in the zone when you get really absorbed in something. And one way of thinking about monotropism is a tendency towards flow type states. So in order to enter flow, you need to feel sufficiently safe, for one. You need to know what you're doing, what you're trying to do. You need to be like good enough at the thing that it's not unrealistic for you to do it, and preferably it provides, you know, some challenge, some degree of challenge. So there's a good match between skills and challenge, and you need to be motivated to do it.
I'm so glad you said that, because I was going to say you need that intrinsic motivation.
Exactly. So most schools do not foster intrinsic motivation because there are things which kids are supposed to know by a particular time, and if they don't, then that's seen as a problem. And like at a primary level, I think actually there is quite a lot of sort of autodidactic, self-teaching, self-directed stuff happens, but most of that is just cut off when you hit secondary school. Most secondary schools, so kids are having to constantly turn their attention towards things that they're not particularly interested in environments where they don't feel very safe, and the tasks are rarely well suited to their skill level. They tend to be either too hard or so easy that they're very, very boring. And then the school day is broken up into like 40-minute periods or whatever it is. It varies from school to school. But if you ever do manage to get into a flow state, like, be warned, because you're probably going to be pulled out of it again any minute now. So, yeah.
And in a way, Fergus, I don't know about you, but for me, it's then not safe, is it? So it's almost like your brain will know, do not be in a flow state in this environment. Not because if you're going to get yanked out of it, it's not safe to be in it in the first place.
Yeah, exactly. Getting yanked out of a flow state is one of the worst things. And most teachers, not being monotropic, don't really think about it. They don't understand that we're in that kind of state in the first place. Like, if every teacher understood that, like, whenever a kid is yanked out of something which they're actually into, it's like they've just been pulled away like a page and a half before the end of a chapter, or like 5 minutes before the end of a sports game or whatever, then maybe they would understand, because it's not an unfamiliar experience to most people. It's just an infrequent experience for most people.
Mm-hmm. And it's more treated behaviourally. Yeah.
All the time being pulled out. So very interestingly, Maria Montessori turns out to have pretty much based her entire educational philosophy around flow states. She observed the kid in the flow state and was like, whoa, that kid is like totally absorbed in what they're doing. They're obviously learning. Is that maybe something we can work with? So, yeah, like her whole sort of educational philosophy really was built around that observation. And I think it's still very difficult to apply in practice. I'm at a school where, you know, I'm working with kids between, you know, in their teens basically, or just before, and many of them do want to work towards exams, and it's difficult to accommodate like total self-direction. Partly it's that it's unusual for Montessori schools to cover this kind of level. So there aren't that many materials ready prepared that we can just give kids the opportunity to choose between, because that's a lot of what happens in like elementary level Montessori schools is materials are set out and kids go and use them and like play with them and do the tasks that are associated with them when they are motivated to do so. And we just don't have the materials to operate that way at the moment at my current school at the level that I'm working at. But we still respect flow states in a way that I've never seen at another school.
It seems so simple, doesn't it, when you talk about it like that? I know. Let's watch how children learn and do more of that. I mean, who would have thought of that idea?
what they learn and what they most enjoy.
That's the thing, isn't it? Oh, look, they really enjoy doing that. Maybe if we do more.
Let's stop them from doing that and make them do math sums for half an hour instead, and then we'll get them writing out words for some reason that they don't understand.
This is the thing for me, though, is at what point did it become sort of radical to let children... Like children. Yeah, like at what point did child-led become a radical approach? Because I think about the work I do, in mentoring, people are like, it must be really intense. Well, actually, I do what the kids want to do. And they're like, you play video games for your job. I'm like, yeah, because that's how you build trust with a child. If that's what they want to do, that's what they're interested in. If that's what they're motivated to do, you are led by the child. And people are like, oh, that's really progressive. I'm like, it's really not. Like, it's just like...
It's the behaviourism thing, isn't it? It baffles. So I'm like a massive, especially in my work as well, I'm a massive like advocate for, ideas such as therapeutic parenting, PACE, that kind of, the child-led stuff, even though I don't particularly subscribe to one particular thing, but anything that's kind of that kind of playfulness, curiosity level. And everybody's like, but what do we do apart from reward and punishment? Like, how do we parent? And it's almost like it's such a cultural thing, isn't it? That we have to, children, when you sit down and you talk to parents about, especially when, those that have been given the label of PDA, and you go, well, it can get easier as you get older, because think about it, as children, we're in this society where they're told what to eat, when to eat, how much to eat, when to sleep, what to wear, where to go every day, what to learn, when to learn it. Like, there is no autonomy at all, is there, in anything? But then when you talk about like treating a child as a human being and not this like idea of child, it's so radical. And they're like, well, what do we do instead of like reward charts? And what do we do instead of like, have you tried respectful kind of direction or some curiosity or trying to, yeah. But anyway, it's bizarre, isn't it, that we just come so far away from... It's almost like there's what we know about children and human beings, and then there's like this idea of the real world. And I love how it's always thrown at autistic people specifically about how we're never going to be able to live in the real world. Well, I don't know about you guys, but I'm self-employed, really engaged in my interests every day, and that's how I earn a living, But it's bizarre, and actually I think it's the kind of societal neurotypical ideal of child that is so far removed from the real world, in actual fact.
Yeah, I find it very funny that schools seem to have this like mythical conception of the real world, which just really doesn't bear much relation to how things actually operate. Like, yeah, in adult life, we have to do some things that we're just not interested in at all. And okay, a lot of people end up in jobs where they are very, very bored a lot of the time. But I don't know. It's like the degree of conformity that's expected in mainstream education is just not replicated anywhere else. Like the fact that so many schools have uniforms and like so few jobs do, so few. And like, even when they do, there's usually a significant amount of leeway in uniforms, or at least tailoring.
It's not safe for children to say no, really, is it? We teach them about strange danger, and we say, don't be vulnerable, children, and don't be groomed, and don't do all this other stuff. But actually, the people that are supposed to be the safest, the teachers, their parents, etc., etc., they're never taught that it's safe to say no to. It's so bizarre, this idea of normal. But yeah.
I'm glad you brought up PDA, Tanya, because I know you wanted to get into PDA a bit tonight.
A little bit, yeah. In terms of monotropism, yeah.
Yeah. So did you have any specific questions there you wanted to discuss around?
Oh, for Fergus. Oh no, so I was just going to say I wanted to really discuss PDA and monotropism really, because I think that we're seeing more and more young people being identified as PDA, especially when they're struggling with the school system. And I wanted to get their opinion really on kind of monotropism and PDA and how you thought that sat.
So, yeah, I mean, PDA is as a drive for autonomy, right? Persistent drive for autonomy. One of the things about monotropism is that in a monotropic attention system, in a monotropic interest system, we get very invested in what pulls in our attention, and having that manipulated from the outside can feel very intrusive. We talked earlier about people being wrenched out of their attention tunnel and learning that it is not safe to enter flow states. And that's a lot about demands, right? You get used to demands being associated with a requirement that you are out of your attention tunnel very soon, and potentially instructed to enter a different attention tunnel at somebody else's behest, which is a very difficult thing to do, actually. Getting invested in something which you haven't chosen to do, fundamentally, and it's one of the things about human psychology that just takes energy. It takes constant effort to do things which you don't inherently want to do.
Yeah, that was my thought as well, in terms of I just wondered if you shared that, because that was my thought as well, in terms of that kind of attention tunnel. And really, people are the biggest generators of demand, aren't they?
Yeah.
Honest, and that shifting of attention. But yeah, that was my thought. And actually, yeah, because you work a lot with PDAs as well, don't you, David? Did you find that the monotropism for me really fits well when it comes to understanding young people that have been labelled as unteachable or, complex, especially in terms of or challenging behaviour? Actually, when you apply monotropism to that, it suddenly makes a lot more sense, I think.
I've found that with a lot of the kids I mentor, one of the biggest issues they have had in mainstream environments is the constant transitions. It's that your concept of monotropic split, Tanya, where you're being ripped away from what you're doing to focus on something else and ripped away and focusing again. I see this all the time in kids I've mentored, and people are going, why are they so burnt out? Why are they expressing, unaliving thoughts? And why are they expressing such high levels of distress? And I've sat in meetings and gone, it's because you're waiting until
there's no way to say no. There's no way to say no.
There's no way to say no, and you're waiting until they're 40 minutes into focusing on something and tell them, right, stop right there, next thing. There is not enough time to transition. Also, the length of the school days. So the number of transitions is because the school day is actually quite long. I know fully grown adults who don't work as many hours in a day as kids go to school. And when you think about the sort of how long kids are in school for, and And then when you throw PDA into the mix, you know, so you've got that demand of you've got to go to school, you've got that demand of you've got to stay in school, you've got the demand of you've got to do what the teacher says, you've got the demand of you have to eat and go to the toilet when you have permission to eat and go to the toilet. I've come across kids who've even been told that you can't drink water right now. It's like, no, like,
yeah, I do wonder if PDAs do have that kind of stronger pull towards that flow state, and they'll almost defend that autonomy to be there. Because that's really, you know, when we were talking like about, you know, monotropic split, monotropic spiral, that kind of stuff, that literally was based on observing this stuff in school. Like, it was never supposed to be it was just literally like, this is what this is what I see happening. But yeah, so I do wonder if those that end up with, you know, identified as PDA are the really, really monotropic people.
Thing is, I see two kinds of PDAs who end up usually needing mentoring from people like me. The one of them that I see a lot is the fauna. So they're wonderful in class, but for some reason their mental health is just, you know, so people go, well, we don't know why they're struggling because they're lovely in the school. You know, we love them. They're our favorite student. Well, no, they're just doing they're just doing everything they're told to do because they think if they don't, there's a threat to their survival. And the other type of PDA, or I see a lot, is the one who is, no, they're disruptive, they're unruly, they're naughty, they're rude. But both of them come from the fact that they are demand avoidant, but they have these two different ways of surviving. Some of them survive by doing everything they're told, no matter how much of an impact it has on their mental health. And the others, you know, they defend that drive for autonomy, and they do so in a very overt way. But
and it's environment. It comes back to Bearden's golden equation, doesn't it? It depends on environment. But yeah, and it's very messy, isn't it? Where one starts and the next ends in terms of whether, you know, it's autism or PDA or ADHD or all these other things. I think we're all on some kind of spectrum, which it was supposed to be. But yeah, I do definitely think that when we're looking at kind of like behavior or problem children, or, you know, all those kind of god awful phrases that people use, actually, if we applied a little bit of monotropism to it, it wouldn't be that complicated, would it?
Yeah.
No, although there are still, you know, all of these
challenges,
things that are interconnected. Yeah. We've got to be in trauma here as well, right? And I wonder how much of PDA is a trauma response, which is instilled, I guess, by demands, right? Like kids learn to associate demands with the trauma of not being able to be in flow. You know, it's not just the wrenching out, it's the expectation of being wrenched out.
And that's what I think Christy Forbes talks about, you know, the PDA kind of response being a call it neurobiological response almost. So I guess that's what we're getting at. You know, and I can see why nobody would want to be in that kind of environment where they can't exist as themselves. And that's it. And I suppose that applies whether you're ADHD or whether you are autistic or whether you are PDA. I think it just depends, you know, it's sometimes more traumatizing. And I think as well, you know, if you've got, it's not just school, is it? You know, especially if you enter in teen years, for example, you're dealing with relationships, you're dealing with social stuff, you're dealing with hormonal changes. So all of these things are, you know, stealing those attentional resources. And as you get older and older, those resources have got to be spread further, and it just doesn't work. So because that's another thing as well, all of a sudden everybody seems to think it comes from nowhere, don't they? You know, and you know, autistic children, they were fine, and all of a sudden they've got to year 5 and the wheels have like, we never saw this come in. And you're like, literally, as you go up the schooling system, the demands increase, the academic demands increase, the social pressures increase. You're you know, your neurotypical peers may be starting to show interest in things like fashions and music, which you don't understand because of the trends issue. And then you've got the social issues, and then you've got, you know, you may be dealing with your own kind of like, who am I, the sense of self, because, you know, the system that we've existed in has basically shut our introspection down, and all of those things.
All of that. And there's the massive reduction in autonomy between the age of about 11 and 16-ish, really.
And then
when you finally start getting a little bit of autonomy back, like you at least get to choose your GCSE subjects and your A levels, right? But that comes with just an absolute mountain of pressure. You know, you're told that if you don't get this right this year, it's going to be bad, right?
Oh yeah, your life's over, Fergus. But then we flip it on its head, you know. So we look at all the ways that, you know, monotropic people aren't suited to kind of the schooling system and so on and so forth. But actually, if you flip that on its head and look at it from a wellbeing perspective, like what can we do to kind of, how do we use what we know about being monotropic to kind of combat that? Because it can massively help. Just being able to live a little bit more authentically, or live a bit monotropically, you know. I mean, for one thing that I do, for example, is I have an office space, but I keep my desk in my living room with the computers always on. So that means that if I'm sat over there and I all of a sudden want to do a thing, it's there. I can just go and do it at any time, and I could be sat there for 3 hours, 5 hours, or 3 minutes, but you know, so that's something that I do for my well-being, because then the demand isn't there to work at set times. So that's something, for example. Engaging in interests is another thing, you know, because
so
it replenishes.
The autonomy to engage in interests when they grab you, right, is massive. It makes such a huge difference. But it's difficult to incorporate into a school environment where, you know, 20 is considered quite a small class, and where there's a prescribed curriculum which everybody is expected to get through in a fixed time. So, you know, I always think that any school can do more to respect autonomy and to like recognize kids' interests and work with them. But it's obviously a huge challenge. And it's probably a challenge in every conceivable school within our current like capitalist society. So even schools where you know, they are set up for neurodivergent kids, or at least better geared towards neurodivergent kids, the kids who end up there are very often ones who have already been traumatized by their school experiences. So you're having to accommodate for that along with everything else.
Yeah, and I'm glad that we brought this up, because Bobby commented about for my youngest, it was the fact that primary tried to use their passions in school that just shut my child completely down. They came very close to completely hating learning. I've seen this where learning environments will try to coerce people with their interests. The number of times I've had to explain, like, you can't say to a child, if you do this, then you can do that. Like, because the minute you take someone's interest and make it a motivator, something to make them do something that they do not appreciate doing, it creates a demand with the things that they enjoy as well.
And we can sniff out the ungenuine kind of motivation. We can sniff that out. We know that intrinsically, we might not know what's happening, but we automatically know that feels unsafe, because we're pattern spotters. So, you know, sticking some Minecraft characters on a math sheet is just going to destroy somebody's well-being in a way, because actually you're just ruining something that gives them spoons.
It's a frustrating thing about autistic intense interests, right? Our fascinations, because I feel like the first thing that a lot of teachers think of when they hear about autistic intense interests is, oh, I can use that. I can use it to motivate kids, or like just stick it on like a decal or something. That's got Minecraft on. That's going to be fun. No, that's not how it works. Like at all. And extrinsic motivation kills intrinsic motivation, right? Once you start rewarding someone for doing something, even if they loved it in the first place, then they're going to end up resenting having to do it.
And then you just kill one of the things that they get stuck into after school to replenish themselves, or to actually take care of their own mental health. Or because I don't know about you guys, but for me, being stuck in my interests is incredibly good for my mental health and regulation.
Yeah. So if a teacher can authentically link what they're teaching with things that they know their kids are interested in, that's brilliant, right? That's really good. But if you're just shoehorning it in or trying to use it as a reward, you're killing the passion there.
Yeah, and I would say certainly, for me as a young person's mentor, I do use interests to scaffold in learning. So, I often use concepts if they're into a particular video game, I might use parts of that, for example, like health bars with showing how much health they have left, using that to scaffold in ideas around energy accounting and the fact that we can only take so many hits before it's game over and we have to reset. So, and interestingly, when I've done stuff like that, the child has often taken that and built upon it themselves to expand their own understanding of their own personal experience of energy accounting. So there is something to be said for using interests as a way of scaffolding in that knowledge, because I think it encourages that self-advocacy, but you absolutely can't use it as a reward.
But the thing is, though, David, you're immersed in their interests at that point.
Yeah.
You are really interested in what they're doing.
Yeah.
Rather than just, Bobby likes penguins, let's count some penguins today. It's, you're already immersed in their world, aren't you? And that's the difference. So, and I think we keep coming back to it, isn't it? It's like we keep coming back to autonomy and authenticity. Like we keep saying those words, and that you've got to be authentic, really, because otherwise it's not going to work. And you've got to allow a child to be as autonomous as they can be.
I mean, you're absolutely right, Tanya, that I don't think anyone is better than children at figuring out ulterior motives. They can quite frankly, they can smell the bullshit from a mile away.
But it always, when parents come to me and they go, oh, how do I get my child to do X? And it's like, you don't get a person or coerce a person to do anything. So let's it's like coming to me and going, how do I get my husband to do, well, have you asked him? Have you explained the importance? Have you looked at the thing and gone, is it really life or death? Can we get around it? It's like, and again, it comes back to that idea of child, doesn't it? How do I get this child to obey? And that idea of,
what you can do is help a child to understand why they want to do it.
Yeah.
If you're lucky. But that only works if they actually do. If there really are genuine, legitimate reasons why they would want to do it.
Yeah, exactly. So that's what we do. And I think that's what you talked about, wasn't it? And I think I wrote it down. I take notes so I don't lose my train of thought, although they're here. So it's like what you were saying in your role at the Montessori school. What are you called? You're called a learning assist. What is it, Fergus?
Guides.
A learning guide.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's I think it's Jodie Smitten as well, that she said teachers shouldn't be called teachers, they should be called learning facilitators, because that's what we're doing. And I think that's also how we should be parenting as well, aren't we? We're facilitating that kind of natural consequences, the logical kind of, this, maybe you want to brush your teeth because of this, maybe you don't, maybe, oh, does that hurt, and that's rather than, do this because it's pressure, and pressure doesn't work for monotropic people. So yeah.
And it doesn't really work that well for an awful lot of people.
No. No.
It's a recurring theme of like educational reformers and things that like teacher is just not really the right word, because you can't actually teach people very much. Like you can tell people stuff, but if you want them to learn, you need to guide them to teach themselves. That's how almost all learning happens, is when someone wants to know something and they find it out. And like, yeah, if you're a sufficiently interesting and engaging teacher, then some of the time kids are going to be like coming to you because they want to learn from you the things that you have to say and asking questions and so on. But it's just like, you can't insert knowledge into somebody's brain, and you can't make anybody do anything. Not really.
No, and trying to force it has the opposite effect.
Yeah.
I think everybody's just been quite distracted. Where's your little doggy gone? I can remember.
He's not here. He's just a little lie down.
Yeah, I was sat here actually thinking, if there's one way to distract an entire bunch of neurodivergent people, is to put a dog on screen, because suddenly the entire comment section just changed to comments about Fergus.
How do you pronounce the name? I can never tell. Kiffle.
Kiffle.
Oh, it really is that? Yeah, Kiffle. Oh,
Just how it's written, K-I-F-L.
Oh. Anyway, sorry.
I was in the room a few minutes ago, so I picked her up.
Bless her, but yeah. Oh, so anyway, we got sideground, but yeah, again, monotropism. Back to monotropism. But yeah, schools. What do you think does need to change then in the education? Do you think it will change? I mean, because we're looking at things, and it appears to be getting, from my perspective again, but I realise that, you know, I'm probably only seeing a certain percentage of the bad end of what's happening. But is it really going to get any better? Because it's like you were saying, we're recognising 30% of students of having, you know, additional needs or additional learning needs, or whatever you want to call it. But it seems that we're going the opposite direction, into forced attendance, criminalising parents of children that can't attend. Not only criminalising, but, you know, accusing them of child abuse. All of a sudden, non-school attendance is now very much become a child protection issue. People are ending up in family courts for educational neglect, where their children are being put on child protection plans and into foster care, and it all comes down to, a lot of it is really not understanding autistic experience, to be honest. So yeah. Not understanding. But I don't see it getting, I mean, it's getting better in terms of the public's knowledge. For example, people, you know, when I started this so many years ago, people are so much more accepting now. It's still got a long way to go, but people are knowing more and they're more interested. But in terms of the schooling system, the education system, I'd say we've gone massively backwards, and we're continuing to.
Yeah, it's a problem having an education system run by Tories. On multiple levels, you know, schools are more authoritarian. They're more likely to have uniforms and enforce them rigorously. And there's this whole like panic going on about school attendance, because tons of kids are not in school. Like attendance is way, way down since before the pandemic. And yeah, because they're Tories, their response is like, oh, we'll just force them back to school.
Oh, and the problem is definitely not that, is it? It's definitely the children or the parents. It's not them. Couldn't possibly be them.
Yeah, and I think what happened is that the pandemic came along. A lot of kids turned out to actually do really well with homeschooling, or even if they didn't exactly do well with homeschooling, it was still a massive relief for them to not be in the school environment for a while. And yeah, some of them, because of that, just haven't gone back. Some of them are long-term sick. Like an awful lot of kids have way less energy than they did before. Their immune systems are compromised. They're probably slightly brain damaged, because COVID does this to people. And we've all had COVID, many of us repeatedly. I mean, some of us not at all still, and well done if you've managed to avoid it. But yeah, it's a pervasive problem. And as a society, we are not dealing with the increased level of disability that we're seeing.
And I think broadly as well, we've got to consider that we are living in sort of like an end stage capitalist hellscape where the parents are so burnt out that actually, if your child is struggling to access the school environment, you have very little energy left to engage with the people who are telling you your child has to be in school, because that authoritarian approach doesn't work. And when we've got, parents that are working sort of ridiculous hours each week to put food on the table and make sure the house is heated, coupled with, an education system that values attendance over the quality of learning.
It values attendance over mental health and life, really. It really is that serious.
Yeah, and that does annoy me, because mental health and physical health have legal parity. Like, they are legally considered to be equal to one another. If your kid's off for a broken leg, oh, don't worry, that's an authorized absence. But if they need a sick day because their anxiety is bad, no, that's an unauthorized absence. It really winds me up.
And that just feeds back into that real kind of like ableist hidden disability kind of attitude, the British, stiff upper lip and suck it up princess type snowflakey awfulness. And I think what I'm finding a lot of, so a lot of the young people that get through to us when it's child protection because it's a school attendance issue, what's happened to a lot of the kids is they weren't necessarily outwardly identifiable as autistic or neurodivergent prior to COVID, but I think what happened is because they stopped, they got off the hamster wheel, they started feeling again. And a bit like we were talking about the demand avoidance, that they know that they're going to get forced back into that environment, which is going to be traumatizing, and their interoception is going to shut down, and it's going to create a whole load of mental health issues later on in life, that actually they became completely demand avoidant around school, and they can't explain why, but they know that if they go back into that environment, it is going to do them some damage. And they're now at the point where, because, we do know that, popular opinion is that the DSM-5 basically lists lots of traumatized autistic traits that aren't necessarily autistic traits. They then are probably bad enough to meet criteria for a diagnosis, but then what happens is developmentalism, where the mother is then blamed for the development of the child. So it's this whole massive Tory melting pot of perfect storm between education, health and social care, because health don't have money for CPD. I went and did a half day's training for our local forensics in our city, and they have had no budget for any external training for the past over 5 years, none. And this is forensics in a city where they've just had a mental health patient like murder a few people because there weren't beds. And and this is the thing, isn't it? We have to look at it, and I don't want to be all doom and gloom, but in the wider context, what are we actually doing to people's mental health later on? And that's probably the way that our politics works, isn't it? It's very short-term thinking.
Yeah. And it's been obvious for years, I have to say, that a lot of kids are very anxious. Teachers talk about this a lot. It wasn't always like this. I mean, to some extent, there always was a lot of school anxiety, but it's clearly worse.
But
I think a lot of that is the wider society, right? It's because we are living in a world where, like, the economy collapsed totally 18 years ago, and it's just never really recovered. We are heading for environmental collapse, and nobody seems to really be taking it seriously. Like, why wouldn't kids be anxious?
We're on the verge of a pandemic. We, all of these things, and then what's happening is we've got politicians inciting hate against one another. So they're stealing all the biscuits and then blaming the other person for doing that. What sort of, and again, it comes back to Bearden's golden equation: environment equals outcome.
Yeah. Yeah.
But we used to be able to, have the sneaky part-time timetable or come in a bit later, or if we couldn't quite manage that, it just used, and that we didn't criminalize people for that before. Now we do.
Yeah, because flexibility is just like, it's fundamentally opposed to Tory philosophy.
But they want us all back in work, don't they? It's funny that they want all the
back in school, back in the office.
All the disabled people they want back in work, but hang on a minute, how are all the disabled people going to be in work when they've already traumatized them in school too much to ever be able to do that? It doesn't make makes no sense.
All these politicians talking about school attendance, and I don't hear any of them talking about making schools accessible for neurodivergent kids. And if you're talking about school attendance and you're not talking about that, you're just not taking it seriously.
But I think, as ADHD wise just said, canaries in the mine, though, neurodivergent people here are the canaries in the coal mine, because the system in general is broken. The way we operate are everything from early years of education through to the end of our lives as grown adults. That system is not well designed. It's quite frankly traumatic for more than just neurodivergent people. But I think neurodivergent people here are the first indicator that system is completely failing. And I think in part we are that indicator because we are a vocal minority. We have online spaces. We talk about these things publicly, such as we're doing here. And I think realistically, when we talk about neurodivergent people being able to access education, they need to realize we're not just arguing for ourselves, because the things that will make education better for neurodivergent people will make education better across the board. If we can take the pressure off of teachers, teaching quality will go up. If we can take the pressure off of students, they will grow into adults who are not entering adulthood already deeply traumatized. And these things benefit everyone, not just neurodivergent people, but people act like accommodating disability or neurodivergence in education is some kind of special treatment, and it's not. It's just meeting basic human needs in a compassionate way.
Yeah, so much about us really is things which are not good for anybody are bloody awful for us. Like, this is why we're canaries in the mine, right? It's because, like, sensory environments, for example, which are like really quite bad. They don't suit anybody's learning. They raise stress levels across the board. But for a neurodivergent kid, they might just make it totally impossible for them to learn.
Absolutely. I'm aware that we're sort of getting to the end of our time now, so it's probably time to wrap this up. Thank you so much, Tanya and Fergus, for an excellent episode. We've had a lot of people watching tonight, actually, probably the most that I've ever had on a live recording of this podcast. It's been a really good convo. I just want to take a moment to acknowledge, since Fergus is here, we've got Weird Pride Day coming up. That's March the 4th, isn't it?
It is, yeah. That's 3 weeks away now.
Oh, it's always close to my birthday as well. One day it'll fall on March. Is it always March the 4th, or is it like?
It's always on March the 4th. Yeah. I enjoyed.
Change it to March the 2nd.
I enjoyed the phrase March 4th. In my dialect, I would never call it.
I love that. Oh yeah, why didn't I hear that before? March 4th.
So yeah, we've got Weird Pride Day coming up. There'll be stuff going on for that. I think there's an in-person event, isn't there, up in Edinburgh?
There is in Edinburgh, yeah, at the Shrub Co-op on the 3rd of March.
Yeah, so if you're in Edinburgh on the 3rd, there's a Weird Pride Day event. I will also be doing a podcast episode for Weird Pride Day. I'm going to be doing a lot of recordings over that weekend because everything seems to have fallen over the 4th, 5th, and 6th. The next episode will be of David's Divergent discussions will actually be this Thursday, the 15th, and I will be talking about the Mental Capacity Act with Rachel Gavin. We've had Rachel on before. Rachel is an independent social worker, and it's going to be an interesting one. Always is. And whilst I've got you here, if you haven't got it already, then please do grab a copy of my book, Cam's in Crisis, which is about Cam's failures to support autistic young people and children. It's like a 100-page rant, but written in a very professional way. So, you know, most of you have probably got to grips with my writing style by now. I'm very good at ranting without people realizing that's what I'm doing. So,
isn't that just monotropic kind of communication?
But yeah, it's been great. Thank you to everyone who's come and joined in the comments and everything. It's been a very busy comment section. I'm sorry I've not been able to keep up with it all. Hopefully you've all been behaving yourselves. But yeah, thank you to everyone who's been here.